Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our last Twilight Talk, thank you, of 2021. Lovely to see you all here. We're absolutely delighted to be running this Twilight Talk with Habitat for Humanity. The title, as you know, is Empty Homes to Cosy Homes. So before we go into that topic, couple of housekeeping. I think you're all on mute, which is great. Please do keep your video on if you'd like. You're not obliged to do it at all. We're hoping this session is going to be quite lively, quite interactive. We've got the chat function at the bottom, which has got the running order already there. My colleague Charlotte has already put that there. Charlotte's going to be backup and tech and pollmeister. My other colleague Elaine here is doing all the post and pre and post event. And please put any questions you've got in the chat function. So this is where we get a lot of dialogue and a lot of the richness out of an event. Now we will send you the chat transcript at the end of the day because it does have a lot of really useful pieces of information. We'll also send you the presentation that David's going to show you, and we will thirdly be sending you a feedback form because we haven't done a lot of work with Habitat for Humanity yet. I think it'd be really great for us to get some feedback on this. So before I introduce our first speaker, I just wanted to say that this is an interesting development for us at the Green Register. We worked with Habitat for Humanity to do a side event at COP26 this year. And of course, we all know that sustainability has three pillars. It's environmental, economic and social. At the Green Register, we believe that all three need to be looked at, but Habitat for Humanity obviously are looking very much at the social issues. They're trying to create underused properties into affordable homes for those most in need. And this really rings a bell for us. So we were really pleased to be able to work with Habitat for this. And we are hoping to be part of their coalition. David will be telling you a bit more about that and about the toolkit in the future. So, you know, it's kind of watch this space in terms of the Green Register's involvement for this. So you'll see the running order. The Twilight Talks, if you haven't joined one already, are very informal, very light, and we actually do have a bit of a prize draw at the end. So we're going to ask you a question at the end, and the first person to put their question in the chat gets a delicious festive gingerbread house that we'll send you by post, old-fashioned post. Okay, so I'm absolutely delighted to introduce David Clare from Habitat for Humanity. He's a fellow architect. He's worked for Habitat for a long time. He's going to start off by talking about this kind of empty homes to cosy homes and the coalition. So David, welcome. If you'd like to share your screen, we'll get going.
Great. Thanks, Lucy, and thanks everyone for having me and Chris as well, who'll introduce a little later here as well. I will just try and share my screen. And hopefully you can all see that. And someone can just tell me yes, and then I can start.
That's great.
That's great. Thank you. So yeah, this evening, really, we wanted to share something of what we're doing around bringing empty spaces back into use. That was the first little change I made to the title, actually, which is indicated there. So we have been involved in bringing empty homes back into use for many years, since about 2010, 2011. And in fact, it was when I joined the organisation was around the time that we began to engage with the empty homes agenda. And that was partly actually out of frustration for Habitat, because we were involved in a wider programme globally. Habitat's a global NGO, which was started in the States in the 70s, and then has gone sort of to over 70 countries worldwide in terms of its programme. But the primary core programme for Habitat is about low-cost home ownership and bringing people into home ownership who would normally be excluded from the housing market on the basis of income or race or whatever other barrier there might be The frustration for us in the UK has been that, you know, inflation of land in terms of cost, the bureaucracy around homes and how they're created, particularly social housing, has meant that it's been a particular challenge to grow the charitable base of work here in the UK. And one of the areas we looked to innovate was actually, why don't we start to do something with empty property? Why don't we do something with homes that are already empty? And we knew that that was already happening with councils around the country, but it was not something we had expertise in. But over the last 10 years, 11 years, we've grown that expertise, and we've done a lot of bringing empty homes back into use. More recently, we've really wanted to look at what could you do in terms of bringing other types of spaces into use, potentially as affordable homes. And that's partly, again, because the need is pressing and the demand is there, but the actual opportunity for, you know, land and converting even empty homes is limited. So it's just continuing to try and innovate and look at alternative ways of doing things. Let's move. There we go. So just to give you a quick outline of where I see it going for the sort of flow of the event, I'll share a bit about Habitat for Humanity and how we started the Empty Spaces to Homes programme, talk about how it's expanding and the way we're going about that, and also about the toolkit, which is something that we're trying to collaborate with others on to give an online tool for people to be able to engage with the whole area of empty spaces to homes and how you might go about it, maybe some lessons learned, tips we can pass on, an interactive space for people to collaborate and grow that network. And then I'm going to hand over to Chris. Chris, do you want to give a wave? Chris Kerr. There he is. Chris is one of our coalition members, and I'll explain about the coalition a little later. But he's from DJB Law, and we're very grateful for him joining us as he gives a perspective from being part of the coalition. I'll mention about our collaborations with the Green Register, which Lucy's already alluded to. And really one of the reason I've highlighted this in yellow is we really want some interactive time with you around the question of pitching retrofit. What level do we pitch it at to get an effective retrofit, but also with cost in mind? And it would be really great to get your thoughts on that when we get to that point in our time together. And Tessa, who's here, I can't actually see everybody on here, but Tessa, if you're there, could you give a wave? If she's not there yet, she'll be joining us later, but she'll be able to share.
I'm here, I'm waving.
Oh, Tessa, great, thank you. Tessa will be able to share about the Gingerbread challenge, which I won't spoil. I won't do a spoiler. Tessa can explain that later on. So Habitat, as I mentioned, is working in 70 countries worldwide. There's a whole raft of programs, and whilst it started on low-cost home ownership, we're now into sort of land rights for people who don't necessarily have access to that, you know, dealing with how to move on from slum settlements to established neighbourhoods and communities. Very much a kind of learning by doing type organisation is what we are. And we really believe that everybody has a right to a decent home and to access to housing that is actually a base for their own development in terms of their own lives and within community. And within the UK, we've had a modest offering over the years, you know, sort of mid-90s, we arrived on the scene in the UK, and I got involved from 2011 onwards. And, you know, the programme has grown, and, you know, we're really proud of what we've been able to do, despite being a relatively small outfit based in London mostly, until more recently as we're looking to expand things. But we've had affiliates around the country as well, in Eastbourne and Banbury. There's a Northern Ireland office that's grown to an international and national programme. And we're looking forward to expanding things with the Empty Spaces to Homes campaign, which is really looking at collaboration on a much wider scale. And I really wanted to just put this up because this is from the Habitat for Humanity International website. And I absolutely love the phrase that I've bolded out there, which is believing is not enough, so we build. It's great to have aspirations, it's great to have a vision, it's great to know where you're going and what you're trying to achieve. But we do really believe in a practical work that actually makes a difference to people's lives on the ground. And so the quality of what we're doing and the actual the projects themselves are just as important as the vision. You know, we are a learning by doing organisation, and why we're here tonight is very much out of that. We've connected with the Green Register because we realise we've got a lot to learn around the area of green retrofit and sort of environmentally sound construction. And it's something that we're really keen to do better at, and are certainly making steps in that direction. So how did the Empty Spaces to Homes programme come about? Well, as I said, we were involved in empty homes work and had been doing that for many years. One of the areas we were doing that was in East London with Barking Dagenham Council. This is a picture of Barking High Street. And we had a really good relationship with the Empty Homes officer there, as we had with a number of London boroughs. And he was particularly keen that we were able to continue to make an impact within the borough. Although it was difficult around the agenda of empty homes, when you're dealing with individual owners, and often it's privately owned, it's a second home, then there's a whole path and journey that they need to go on to understand that their home, whilst being an asset of some kind, because it's sitting there probably increasing in value, it's also deteriorating because there's water ingress, or there's some different problems with it being empty. And so there is a whole education process around that. And I think we felt that the scaling up of that work around empty homes, whilst we'll still continue to look to try and do that, was limited. Whereas there was great potential to look at property that was empty, that was owned by the local authority. And they were really keen to explore that with us. So we looked at everything that was on their list in terms of their commercial leases. So this is flats above shops and sort of storage space above shops. And it was a surprising amount. And we ended up identifying a property in the middle of Barking High Street. I can't tell you which one for safeguarding reasons, but we were able to explore the potential to do this property up in terms of housing young people leaving care from the borough. And this is something as an organisation we're really keen to do, is identify a local need and look to try and solve that local need through local interventions, local knowledge, local collaboration. And we hopefully will bring in that expertise around development and access to funding. We have a corporate supporter base who are able to support our projects and have done for decades. And that's a really strong offer to come to a local authority with, or other organisations, in terms of partnering, because we're able to actually provide part of the funding solution as well. And the property, as you can see, it's on the edge of a public square, so it was tricky in terms of access. We also had the difficulty that it had been empty for over 20 years. No one was quite sure. So it was in quite a poor state. And we were able to then look at a side access to the property. We were able to come up with an idea of accessing it from street level, which is really important to give them their own front door rather than it being from around the back. And this is often the problem you can get with retail properties, is access. You typically have servicing from the back of shops, or you have a high street or a mall or whatever in front of the shops. And so it can be quite difficult around access. But we had an opportunity here to come out on the side, and that's what we did. And we were able to look at the floor plate in terms of getting maximum use out of that. It was key for us to get as many bedrooms as we could, but also meet space standards in terms of making sure those rooms, those habitable rooms particularly, were pleasant to be in, were of a good size. And so we managed to get 3 bedrooms in the end, together with a supervisor's bedroom there, which is enabling a living care worker to operate from within the flat as well, should that be a requirement. If not, it would just be another bedroom for a young person, and they'd have remote support from children's services. And you can see the sort of level of transformation. When we take on a property, it's usually a deep retrofit, and that's really why we're interested in discussing things with you tonight, because we have such an opportunity when we do a deep retrofit to actually bring back the property in a far greater level of performance thermally, and in terms of its quality, the quality of the interior, the quality of that space and what it is like to live in. And we had that opportunity with this property. And we would tend towards fabric first. We put in decent amounts of insulation. We looked to try and introduce an efficient heating system. It was gas on this occasion. And we also looked at ventilation and other issues around that. But I have to say, it's sort of building regs plus, you know, we're at the lower end of the kind of retrofit, green retrofit scale, as it were, on this. And this is where we're really interested in collaboration to try and improve that product and see what more can be done. And it's been excellent to engage in that first at COP26 with the Green Register and collaborating on that, and then in subsequent conversations since, and hopefully tonight too. And we managed to move the young care leavers in by the end of 2019, just before the pandemic struck. And so great that they were in for Christmas, and really heartwarming to know that they were in a new home, moving on from institutional care and able to actually move on with their lives. We end up with quite a cross-sector partnership approach on projects. And the key to that is that we look to collaborate from very early stages. I mean, it's key that we can find a funding route from early on. And these were some of the partners that we had on the project, which we treated as a pilot effectively for looking at how we might be able to expand this empty spaces to homes type work. The partners really stuck by us through thick and thin. We had quite a long, tortuous journey early on with the project. And I think lots of lessons learned, lots of sort of mutual encouragement. And I think it's a testament to see they saw it through, but also we continue to collaborate with these organisations and have been able to grow that base of collaborators as well. And just mention CBRE, you know, many of you on at the event tonight will have design skills, considerable design skills, I'm sure, and engineering skills. And CBRE were able to give pro bono support to the project, which was really valuable, both for the architectural design and also for the planning consultancy element of what we did. And I worked it out, it probably amounted to about £5,000 to £7,000 worth of work that they put in. So it's not all money, sometimes it's people's skills and time that really makes a difference. We're able to do on-site training for young people, and we're able to expand that programme now as well with further pipeline of properties that Barking and Dagenham have been able to approve for us to take on to do these deep retrofits for a similar purpose for young people leaving care. And the Barking and Dagenham College have a programme called REACH, which is helping grow confidence in young people who have learning difficulties, severe learning difficulties sometimes, and they come with a job coach on site, so they're able to provide that soft support, which is great. We're able to provide a good on-site experience and be effectively a charitable contractor that understands the need to be patient and to take time over the training. And I think we had some great feedback from the first young people that were involved in this before March 20, when we had to down tools. We're picking up the construction again now and able to look at, again, the training aspects for young people on site. Again, collaborative support from the Nationwide Foundation on that, which has been brilliant, helping to provide for some of our core costs. So just to give you an idea of how we hope to try and scale this up, we're looking at a cycle where we're taking underused and vacant property owned by local authorities. It doesn't have to be just local authorities. This could be other institutions, it could be other organisations where there is an opportunity to better use some of their assets which are hidden and underused. And that can then be either leased to us, or we could look for them to retain it, and we act as effectively a charitable contractor, bringing in grant to the process, doing a turnkey approach, and then effectively they continue with the property, but it has an income stream against it, which will effectively pay back anything that they've borrowed to enable that to happen. Equally, we could do the same thing under a lease, so we could borrow to enable that to happen, bring in the grant to help subsidise it to get an affordable outcome, and then effectively house people who are in local need. So we see it as something that can go beyond young people in need. It could be for women who are fleeing domestic violence. It could be for others moving on from local hostels. I think move-on accommodation is very suitable for this type of approach, because Their street properties quite often relatively anonymous, which is important, and close to local amenities and public transport. So well placed. And to help us scale up, we've looked at collaborating with some of our corporate partners. One in particular, M&G, have been very supportive of the campaign and have helped us to form a whole 3-year program around growing this and scaling this up, and to look to try and do that again across the sectors. So to get civil society involved, to get the private sector in terms of funding and skills in support, and also to engage the public sector as well, primarily through local authorities and empty homes officers and strategic housing officers, but also obviously in terms of funding where possible, and policy making, lobbying, advocacy. And we were able to launch some research in February, which was really helpful, which effectively gave us the springboard for providing a kind of scoping exercise for how much opportunity there was around the UK for this. And we can provide some links. I don't know whether Tessa, you might be able to put some links, or Lisa, put some links into the chat. It'd be great to link people into the research that we produced. I won't have time to explain it to you now. And we're moving on to also consider a toolkit, which is the online tool that I mentioned, that we're really keen to get people collaborating around, so that we can produce live modules that can be engaged with online, and people can learn fast through things online and also connect with others around this. And sharing that with roadshows online and in person. Just a quick mention to say that with the international nature of Habitat, we're also engaged in converting empty space and bringing empty buildings back into use elsewhere around the world. I won't go into each in turn, but again, a visit to our website or to Habitat for Humanity International's website would point you in the direction of some of these projects. But there's some fantastic things going on around the globe in this space, obviously beyond Habitat's work as well. And we are looking to try and use networks across the UK. For many years, we've been connected to selfhelphousing.org. This is their map. So I'm not trying to say these are our projects. This is just more to do with hundreds of organisations that are involved in community-led housing and are trying to do things locally. And on the right are organisations that we've connected with in terms of trying to grow our networks, trying to partner with, trying to keep the conversation going. And some of those come on board in our coalition of organisations as well. And I think there's such an opportunity with the high street itself in terms of regeneration. We're not trying to say that every shop should be turned into a home. What we're trying to say is that there are definitely certain tertiary and secondary shopping kind of areas where the actual future for shops is very dim and unlikely to be sustainable. Therefore, we need to be much more savvy about how those assets can be used and brought back for the good of the community. And I went to an event, a locality in Birmingham, Locality 21 event, which was fantastic. And one of the seminars was on the high street and the role that community organisations can play in the high street. And these were all some of the ideas that organisations threw onto an interactive board whilst we were doing that. And you can just see that there is a lot of creative thinking going on around how we can bring life back to the high streets. I'm just going to skim through this. This is going to be something that you could engage in more detail if you'd like to, by engaging with us when we come to the toolkit online. But it's just to give you an outline and an overview of what our Empty Spaces to Homes toolkit is going to be centered around and what the framework is for it. And we really feel that one of the core things that we do as Habitat is we try to engage in an area in a way that we understand the fabric of what's happening in society there. So it takes us some time to get our bearings, to understand the organisations that are already at play, to connect with the local authority, usually around a prospective project, but not always. But one of the key things is that usually there's a group that we're trying to support who have a local vision. And vision is so important. Vision is at the heart of every project. And quite often a vision can be unformed or underformed, if you like. And it's something that we really help to try and enhance early on in a project, is to bring out what is the core vision? Why are you doing what you're doing? And how can we possibly help? support you to realise that. So what we're calling effectively the 4 pillars really go to support or form the vision. And you can see each pillar there, the client and brief and community need, being really the key driver, which is why we've highlighted it against the other 4. You know, if you don't really know what need you're trying to meet and you haven't formed the brief fully, now we all know, everyone involved in projects on here I know will know that that's so vital, but it's often a step that gets undercooked. You also need to be clear on the access to land that you have. Again, we can often start on projects and not have a full understanding of whether we can really unlock the land and what the legal issues are around it, what the ownership issues are. So it's vital that we have a clear sight of the issues around land and ownership. And then the design and technical you'll be very familiar with, far better versed than me, certainly around the areas that we're discussing tonight. But absolutely vital that we engage with those issues early on, particularly planning, particularly any restrictions relating to the site and to the intended construction techniques, etc. And then financial and governance, it's obvious but important to point out that it's got to be viable, and that the governance structure you choose really needs to suit the project. It might be that you form in a certain way to access certain funding, or to enable you to achieve the outcomes of the vision. And really these are some questions that relate to each area. I won't go through them in detail, but it's obviously important to know who we're building for. How do we define affordability? For us, that's key around housing and the needs that are being fulfilled. The land and the ownership, as I mentioned, what restrictions might there be? Design and technical. How can we achieve the vision through the design? What costs and consultants and consultations, wider consultations are involved? And we place a big emphasis on community engagement and community consultation as part of that process, and do an enhanced version of that. Quite often, the local authorities are surprised at the level we go to, because they're pushing people hard to try and do community engagement, and a lot of people don't do it very well or just pay lip service to it. But it's quite the opposite for us. It's a core component of forming the brief and supporting that brief. And then, as I mentioned, about the viability of the project and the legal structure. So really, it was just to say that this is what comes together as the project vision, and it's going to be, by its very nature, overlapping areas, and it's going to be a compromise. It's not going to achieve everything you want in every one of those 4 pillars, but each of the pillars is key. And even from an early stage, we need to be engaging in each of those areas for the project to come together in a strong and defined way. And that's what we're going to center our toolkit around. And obviously, one of those areas we would love to be the kind of green retrofit agenda. And Lucy already produced a fantastic video, half-hour video, for the COP26, which we think would be really suitable to include in that, and also try and expand on around that. I'm actually going to hand over at this point to Chris Kerr and let him introduce himself. But thanks for joining us, Chris. David Jones-Bald have joined our coalition of organisations that are looking to support the Empty Spaces for Homes agenda and campaign. And over to you, Chris.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, so I hope none of you've got a high definition screen, because it's going to be my face that you'll see. So I recently attended a Zoom reunion with some of my former law school classmates, and one of them reminded me that in my second year, after a particularly grueling piece of land law coursework, I told him to shoot me if I ever ended up working in the real estate law sector. My name is Chris, and as David said, I work for the specialist real estate law firm David Jones-Bald. What I didn't know at the time, and I do now, is that real estate and all that relates to it, planning, construction, the environment, is right at the center of the action when it comes to solving some of the biggest problems facing our society today. Problems like, how do we transform and regenerate areas that have suffered economic turmoil and reduced life expectancies for many years? How do we get the infrastructure in place rapidly to do widespread COVID testing and deal with a dramatic increase in hospitalizations? How do we save the high street and increase employment? How can we reimagine our existing estates to keep people safe and yet simultaneously maximize performance during this pandemic. This is what excites us at DJB about our specialist area. We relish coming alongside people like all of you on the call today who work directly or indirectly in the built environment, meeting these big ticket problems head on. So when Habitat for Humanity approached us earlier this year and told us that they were working to create a world where everyone has a decent place to live, and that they had an idea that would help them get closer to doing that, we couldn't wait to get involved. As David will be touching on shortly, this isn't the only problem Habitat for Humanity have to consider when tackling this issue. We are in a global climate crisis that requires urgent action. And so the problem evolves from how do we ensure everyone has a decent place to live to how do we ensure everyone has a decent place to live that is sustainable and does not worsen the climate crisis we are in. This is, of course, an enormous problem to solve. And it is a problem that directly or indirectly links all of us on the call today. So I want to briefly discuss with you how to strike the all-important balance when it comes to dealing with society's biggest problems, whether it is the housing crisis, the climate crisis, or indeed both at the same time, as is the case with the Habitat for Humanity's Empty Spaces to Homes project. So the balance we all must strike when we tackle these big problems facing our society is this: we must confront the brutal facts of the problem in front of us, whilst retaining the hope that we can and will overcome it. I'll repeat that again. We must confront the brutal facts of the problem that we face, whilst retaining the hope that we can and will overcome it. That balance came from Admiral Jim Stockdale, who was captured when his plane was shot down during the Vietnam War. The prisoners of war who were unrealistically positive eventually gave up after repeated disappointments and sadly died. The same happened to those who could never see past the severity of the challenge ahead. It was the people who understood their brutal current reality, yet still held on to the hope that they would one day be released, that managed to survive the ordeal. If you are to overcome the biggest problems in society today, you must confront the brutal facts of the problem in front of you, whilst retaining the hope that you can and will overcome it. So today, I want to firstly briefly touch on the brutal facts about the housing and climate crisis, before I wrap this up with two reasons why we can be hopeful that we will one day soon see everyone living in decent and environmentally sustainable housing. First, here are some of the brutal facts about the housing crisis. The statistics I'm about to quote relate to the UK only, and they are from the time period of April 2021 to just this last week. Bear in mind, for context, that the UK is the 5th wealthiest nation in the world. And so the data will be even more terrifying for some of the other countries that Habitat for Humanity work with. There are currently 1.1 million people waiting for social housing in England alone. Last year, only 6,500 social homes were built to meet that demand. The latest figures from Shelter say that a third of British adults are affected by the housing emergency. The exact figure there is around 17.5 million people who currently are without a safe, secure, and decent home to live in. As of December 2021, 274,000 people were homeless, with thousands more expected to lose their homes soon. And 91 families were made homeless every day in the period of April to June 2021, with this number now seemingly increasing. And in 2021 so far, approximately 1.9 million people have had their health negatively affected by the very housing that they are living in. Truth be told, I could do a whole webinar to scope out the housing crisis for you, but this gives you just a flavor of the brutal reality of the problem. It is enormous in scale. It is urgent because the data is getting worse, and people's well-being and, sadly, in some cases, lives are at stake. The problem is also complex because there are so many variables that need to be dealt with if we are to have any chance of seeing a world where everyone has a decent home to live in. As we are fresh from COP26 and all of you will have an understanding of the brutal facts about our climate crisis, I won't lay it all out again for you here. But needless to say, we know that the problem is enormous in scale. It's extremely urgent and a remarkably complex issue to solve. Things are getting worse every day that we don't take action. Aren't you all glad you turned up for my inspirational and uplifting talk today? But that brings me nicely to the second part of the oh so critical balance. Yes, this is an enormous challenge we face, but I remain hopeful that we will see progress in Habitat for Humanity's vision of a world and a UK where everyone has a decent home to live in, and that importantly, these homes will be sustainable. Here are two quick reasons why. The first reason is that there are already wonderful ideas and significantly output to achieve this. Retrofit, which is something I know that all of you involved with the Green Register are very familiar with, does give us reason to be hopeful. The Green Register's webinar at Habitat for Humanity's COP26 event did an excellent job of demonstrating how we can retrofit our empty properties to sustainable standards so that low income and homeless people can be offered affordable, comfortable, and healthy places to live. Thanks again for that, Lucy. There is the difficult balance between stewarding project costs against high priorities with sustainable retrofit design, but it can and has been done. In fact, the very building we were sat in for the COP26 event in Glasgow was a retrofit. The owners had completely insulated the exterior of the building, installing triple glazed windows, heat recovery systems, and solar PV panels. By reducing their heat demand and generating local power, they aim to make the building energy net positive and are confident that that will be the case at the end of the year when they've finished their work. Encouragingly for all of us, Habitat for Humanity already have a number of fascinating case studies of successful retrofits that combine good quality refurbishment approaches with charitable outcomes for the community and individuals served. We can therefore be hopeful because we have moved beyond blue sky thinking to actual, tangible results in the form of real life, decent, yet sustainable homes for those who need it. The second reason we can be hopeful is that many great people and organizations across the UK and other nations are coming together to tackle these problems. And history tells us that when great nations, people and organizations come together to overcome a crisis or a major problem, they often do so. I'm reading a quite wonderful book at the moment called One Christmas in Washington. And it's about Winston Churchill's trip to spend Christmas with the then US President Franklin Roosevelt to try and build a partnership that would ultimately overcome the existential crisis that was the Axis powers. You will know how that ended up. The UK, the USA, and many other nations came together to form the Allied forces and ultimately overcome this enormous threat to the world. During COP26, I was fortunate enough to meet and hear about some great coalitions that have been formed with public and private sector organizations coming together to develop new technologies and utilize existing strategies so that we can stop and potentially reverse the climate crisis at hand. Of course, the coalition I could talk to you about is the one that Habitat for Humanity and M&G have created that includes organizations such as Lloyds of London, Miller Homes, DJB, and others that have come together to brainstorm, innovate, and most importantly, turn ideas into actions. We know that the best way to overcome problems of this scale is to bring lots of different skills, personalities, strengths, and resources to the table, all working together in partnership to achieve this ambitious outcome. Amongst other things, the coalition have committed to creating a toolkit that David touched upon a moment ago that will provide free practical resources to all organizations over the country for converting empty properties into homes, addressing legal, financial, and technical design areas. We will, of course, be providing input into the legal issues that come up, as well as considering some wider policy and political context around repurposing empty buildings. The second reason then we can be hopeful is that there are great people and organizations who care about these issues coming together to solve them. Before I hand you back to David, I'd like to finish with a story that demonstrates the sort of attitude we need to overcome the enormous problems we've touched on today. A gentleman called Lieutenant Chesty Puller led a Marine regiment in the Korean War. At one point in the war, they were surrounded by 8 enemy divisions in all directions. He knew that his team were experienced enough to understand the brutal reality that they faced, an almost certain death. So as their leader, he tried to add some all-important hope into the situation. So Lieutenant Puller looked around and said, okay, they're on our left, they're on our right, they're in front of us, and they're behind us. Excellent, they can't get away from us this time. Amazingly, they survived and got through that ordeal. Whether you are tackling the housing crisis or the climate crisis or both, face the brutal facts of the current reality, but never lose hope. You will somehow overcome it. Whatever the major problem you have set out to solve is, I wish you all the very best in your endeavors. It's people like you that give up your Monday nights 2 weeks before Christmas to try and tackle the big problems we face that make me glad I did end up working for a real estate law firm after all. Thank you. Here's David.
Thanks so much, Chris. It's great to have just a different perspective, and thanks so much for what you shared. We split the talk into two parts with Chris at that point, because I really want to move on to, just share that for you. Hopefully that's coming up. Make it full screen. Really want to share the conundrum that we face effectively and try and explore that more together collaboratively. As I mentioned, Lucy was involved in providing us with a brilliant 30-minute video as part of an engagement we did at COP26, a side event. We also collaborated with TGR on producing a two-side sort of paper, which really just sets out the kind of overview of the issues around effective retrofitting for affordable homes, and includes a link to that video. Again, I think we can probably provide that in the chat, a link to that. Hopefully either Tessa or Lisa might be able to do that for us. And it was great because for us, we were able to find in TGR an organisation that could understand that we were at a certain point in our journey on retrofit, and we needed expertise to understand, can we focus our energies to make sure that we get the biggest sort of environmental bang for buck. And we're going to get more of a focus of that in the second part of the talk. But just to cover briefly the main points that Lucy brought out, and none of these will be probably new for you. I imagine for some of you, I'm really skimming over the surface of something you have deep knowledge of, but it's worth still, I think, highlighting these areas. The first is that we're not wanting any longer a linear economy. We're wanting a circular economy. We want to actually understand how we can live in a sustainable way. And that isn't purely about products and recycling. It's about how we think about how we do life within the space of the social and ecological framework that we live in. And that safe space for us as humanity is where we're not damaging either the social foundation or the ecological parts of our environment. And it's really important that we think that it's a paradigm shift really that's required. It's not purely about just adopting a different lifestyle. It's a change to our thinking. And that's what needs to happen if we're to see some effective change, because we're all guilty in our patterns of living of consumerism, whether we like it or not. But we all have to challenge our own consumerism at whatever level we're at. If I'm at level 1 in that challenge, I'm unlikely to be delivering results at level 10. But if you're at level 9 or 8, you'll be wanting to get to level 10, because we know that the impact, collective impact, is huge when we are not considering these things properly. And the second area is with buildings, particularly fabric first. And we see a huge opportunity with the projects we do for deep retrofit. So we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can when we put back fabric to that building, that it's performing well. And we all know that insulating the building first well is a primary need for a retrofit, and we'll get you probably 50% of the way there. I mean, it will really make a massive difference to actually the performance of that building to insulate it well. That then comes with its own issues around ventilation and around the quality of space, quality of air, etc. Condensation issues. Again, Lucy touched on that really well in her video. But really, we're moving from that kind of leaky sieve of a building to some sort of form of intelligent comfort. How do we actually live in that space intelligently with the building in harmony and with the environment in harmony. And then, as I mentioned, getting bang for buck in terms of environmentally, we are stewarding a restricted budget as a charity. We want to make sure that we put the money into the right things when we come to the retrofit. I think it was Les who put in the comments about the budget for our projects. And you're absolutely right, it's quite an expensive way of bringing property back. But I think what we've found is that the benefits of doing it to an existing building are kind of multi-layered. So you've got the fact that it's on a high street, you've got the fact that it's an eyesore and a social problem. It's probably a magnet for squatters and no? Oh, sorry. It's probably a magnet for squatters and vandalism and other types of things. So it can be a real issue around providing sort of a problem property, and it can have been like that for years. And it can be causing a problem for local authorities when they're in ownership of it as well. But equally, it's well placed. It's quite often well placed for amenities and public transport, as I've mentioned before. So all of that, then you add the environmental argument, which is there's embodied carbon or embedded carbon in that property. Knocking it down and rebuilding with new doesn't really make sense when you look at the actual energy embodied in that whole process. And equally, I think the last Green Register event I was on, looked at a really brilliant retrofit down in the southwest. And it was great to go into such detail and see just how they went about it, very collaborative. But there was lots of questions about cost. And, if we are going to the nth degree with our retrofits, they're expensive, potentially. They actually contain quite a lot of embedded carbon or embodied carbon in those buildings once they're a finished product. And would it have been better to end up with a better performing new build? It is a question that's worth posing at the outset of the project. But I think for us, I think this helps to provide a solution for a problem that's not going to go away. Empty buildings and empty property are everywhere. And something positive needs to be done with them. And then I think, just to touch on this, we need to think about the fact that climate change is linked. Climate change is linked to poverty. It's not that the two are just separate issues. Where there is poverty around the world, we're talking largely about the UK today because our programme and our campaign is UK focused. But if we looked at around the world and issues that we're facing globally, there's a huge need for kind of really sound construction and technology and understanding of how to intervene at low cost level around the world. And if you think about the impact that can have, it's far greater than we could achieve in this country alone. And there are whole systems and governments and societies where, the idea of sort of sitting around on a Monday evening talking about, how we could fine tune our retrofit just it's not even on their radar. How to survive tomorrow is on their radar. How are we going to get enough to eat? How are we going to feed our kids? Where can they possibly get an education? And so that, the link between the state of society and how we approach the built fabric of society is a really important link to make. And, I think we should be thinking about the fabric of society as much as we are about the bricks and mortar and how our projects have an impact positively or negatively within the space within which they're operating. They're part of a community, they're part of a town or a city, there's a statement about what we're doing with that building and what it's achieving, and there's a purpose behind the building. And this is not to lay any layers of guilt on anybody at all, but it's just to pose a bigger question. Can we think about sustainability in a bigger way? There's a couple of definitions to sustainability that I looked up online. Anyone can access these dictionary definitions. One is it means able to be maintained at a certain rate or level, which, yeah, I think we understand that. But there's a second definition, which was able to be upheld or defended. And I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about sustainability. Can we actually defend and uphold the approach to sustainability that we're taking? Is there a ability to say, yes, this this is why we're doing it. We have a confidence about what we're doing. We've decided to do it at this level. It might not be what you think is best, but we have decided it is best on the basis of X, Y, and Z. And I think we all have to come to a kind of decision with our own consciences as to what's an important set of parameters around which we're going to pitch our retrofit. And that's as important around the green agenda as it is with anything else. So really, that's just an honest kind of expose, I suppose, of where we're at as an organisation. We are soul searching at the moment as to where we pitch our retrofits on an environmental scale. You know, we definitely would love to go to the kind of passive house end of things. We also equally know we can't probably afford that out of our budgets. And again, that last deep retrofit seminar that we attended with the Green Register was really enlightening. You know, there wasn't an answer to what the budget was, and my suspicion was it was very high, and it was a very envisioned client who was able to do that. That's wonderful, and all credit to them for going that far and for all the collaboration that happened to make it happen. But we need to find something that's going to be sustainable. At this point, I think I just wanted to see if I can do this. I'm going to share Lucy's, just a little excerpt from Lucy's video. So, one sec. It says. Let me share. Can you see that okay? Can someone tell me?
Not yet. We can see your file saying Green Register Clip 1.
Okay, one sec. It's not come up yet.
Okay.
David, did we also put it onto one of like Vimeo or YouTube to make that work?
Let me just try again.
Okay.
My screen did a bit of a funny thing there, so let's try again.
It did work earlier, so hopefully it'll work again.
Another classic thing.
The next point I'd like to talk about.
Does that come up?
We can't see it, we can hear it.
Okay, I'll do one more attempt. Let's try sharing screen and bring it that way.
There we go.
Is that there?
Yep, well done.
Great. Okay, thank you.
The next point I'd like to talk about is the cost versus carbon benefit. So I'm often asked, well, what's the best thing to do if you've got a limited budget? What's the best bang for your buck? This was some research that was done by Arup engineers about 10 or 15 years ago. So they were measuring what £10,000, so in today's money, that's probably £25,000, would do with a certain number of typical measures in existing buildings. So they've got various different types of houses along here. And the blue bar is the number of the carbon dioxide kilograms per square metre per year that's produced. And the blue is after the measures have been done. So if you look at something like this 2-bed Victorian terrace, it's practically halved in the amount of carbon dioxide that's produced because of those measures. It doesn't mean to say that if you spent another 10,000 or 20,000 in today's money, you'd get to zero carbon, because there's the law of diminishing returns here. And there's a very useful tool that United House created called Value Carbon. I can't find it on the internet anymore, but basically what it's saying is that we've got carbon saved along the bottom and we've got cost at the side. There is a tipping point where you start to have a law of diminishing returns. So number one here is where you've got fairly low costs and high carbon saved. So that's things like insulation, draft proofing and so on. And then the curve starts to go up steeply where you've got more difficult, more expensive measures. And what I put down here is we can do one property at 70% carbon saving for about 22,000, or we could do 3 properties and save 50% for more or less the same amount. So when we're looking at improving older properties, particularly when we're trying to improve them for low income and homeless people, we would suggest that you go for the quick wins at the bottom and don't try and make it perfect with the money that's obviously going to be quite limited.
Great. Thanks, Lucy, for your input there.
You're welcome.
I think I think for me that really highlights the sort of issue that we're grappling with, which is how do we do real world retrofit to sort of greatest impact when we're looking at trying to scale something up charitably, as we are, and also not get too overly concerned about the kind of theoretical side of things, such that, you know, the scale becomes very limited, because the bigger impact, you know, the more you can do, the bigger impact you have. Now, equally, I think we could also recognize that if you did, you know, 50%, as Lucy suggested, then there's still a 50% negative impact from what you could have done, or let's say a 20% negative impact. You could have got to 70% with that building. So, I mean, we can see it's not an easy, you can't always dilute these things down, but I think it was a really interesting observation for me, and really helpful and timely for us in terms of posing that question to ourselves. And it's something we want to widen out together as well. Right, I'll go back to the presentation. We're nearly there with me droning on, and then we can move on to discussion. But we wanted to really say that this is where we're at the moment. I'm an architect, so, you know, we have engaged in this area for a while, but I'm certainly still got L plates on in a big way, and I'm aware that there's an uplift to Part L coming up. I think it's rolled out this month and is in force in June, and there's also the LETI guidance that's been released by Reba and other collaborators around sort of, I suppose, a flexible or adaptable way to think about retrofit. What's your actual building? What's your conditions? What's the context? How do you actually target the biggest impact for the level of spend, level of restriction you might have with that building? And then there's Benefit, which came in, I think in 2011, but particularly in the UK, 2015 is my understanding. Again, some of you will know a lot more than I do about these things, but there are different levels that we could target, perhaps different standards that we could go for as a charity. Just to touch on them briefly, I'm aware that the Part L uplift involves trying to improve on CO2 emissions by the year 2025, in line with Future Homes kind of targets that the government has set for 2025 and 2050. The net zero, the march to net zero, effectively being behind all of this. And we're aware of the sort of timing there on the right of that process and what we're in with that. What it means in reality, though, I think there's quite a lot of debate out there about whether the building regs will actually achieve what they're setting out to achieve. The LETI retrofit guide, I have started to read it and look at it. I think it looks really sensible to me. I like the language, it's very accessible. And also it seems very well thought through. There seem to be several organisations, I think they've possibly even had 100 organisations involved in putting that guidance together. And to me, there's an ability to adapt. So you're looking at whether you're going for an exemplar retrofit or a best practice, whether it's a heritage building, whether it's something that's got restrictions and is confined, in which case you won't be able to achieve everything. I do really like the approach that they've taken to it, and it seems very sensible to me. I'm really keen to read it sort of cover to cover when I get a chance to. And then there's the Benefit, which is really like a passive house retrofit approach, in recognizing that you're unlikely to reach passive house standard with an existing building. It's where you can target to get as far as you can with that design. And I'll just credit Eco Design Consultants. Thank you for unwittingly lending me your image for today, and something I found on the web, so hopefully I haven't offended anybody by pulling that in. But I think it's great that there's this level of design focus on retrofit, and we're actually coming up with solutions and ways to overcome some of those fundamental problems around ventilation, condensation, and how to target the heating system effectively. And actually that the living, breathing building works together as a whole effectively. So we're going to move into a more interactive slot now, which is going to happen through polls that Charlotte is going to initiate with us. And then there's also a more reflective question that we're going to be putting up in the chat. The poll questions are genuine questions that we'd really love to have your input on. It can be our takeaway from today that we can think on in more detail. But it would be really helpful for us if you could engage in that and give us an idea of what you think. For us as a charitable organisation, I'm not asking you to put what your organisation should be targeting, but for us as a charitable organisation, with everything that I've mentioned so far, where do you think we should be putting our energy and our money? And then the second question is really about the bang for buck, very much what Lucy highlighted in the video. What elements, what retrofit elements, if you scroll down, by the way, in the poll, you'll be able to get to the second question. What retrofit elements are essential to target to get the greatest environmental bang for buck? And you're going to be selecting your top 3. Now, I know that this is quite a crude method and these are complex issues, and this is not, I'm not trying to water it down into something as simple as this, but it will just give us, from a set of professionals very engaged in this arena, a flavour for where you think our energy and our finances should be going. Thank you.
We're still getting some response here, David, so I'll just let it run for a couple more minutes if that's okay with you.
That's fine. Can I just ask, Charlotte, will we get the results, be able to be circulating the results of this in a form other than just on the Zoom call?
I think I can download the results, so I'll try and do that.
Great. That'd be really useful. Thank you.
Should we give it one more minute for everyone who wants to put an answer in to do so?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm going to close the polls now. Can you see the results there?
Yeah, certainly can. That's great. It kind of confirmed where I was beginning to veer as well in terms of letting best practice on the first question. I just felt as an organisation that's something that we could achieve and actually seem very joined up, had thought about the climate change agenda in its larger kind of perspective, because it was looking at not just what we do with buildings, but what's happening with energy as a whole and how the whole system is working with energy companies, etc. And on the second question, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we already target insulation as being the primary thing, as an intuitive thing, as designers, which I think we've all come to realise it's so important. I think the air tightness is really helpful. It's not something we're doing particularly well at the moment. We're not doing it badly necessarily, but we've not really targeted it as an area that we can tackle, partly because I think you then get into potentially other issues like, are you going to have mechanical ventilation? That tends to add cost and some complexity to the project. So we tend to look at the fabric and the windows and all of that, but haven't really got into the next level, which is air source heat pumps and PV panels and the air tightness, which is where we want to go next. So thanks so much for engaging in that. I think really at this point we wanted to open up for a wider discussion around some of the findings, the Q&A against what we've been talking about, Liz and I. And then there'll be a third question, which we're just going to put into the chat. It's more of a reflective question for you personally. Thanks for being here tonight. We really value the engagement and would hope that your takeaway from tonight is to think about what sort of a difference you can make with the skills that you have in the arena of retrofit, you know, both through the projects that you do. I'm sure you're already making a difference, but also in terms of how you may be able to help or assist others, possibly who couldn't afford the same access to the skills levels or the consultancy level that some of your projects are able to engage or that you're able to offer. Because I think that is also going to make a massive difference where there are a lot of projects that would not be able to engage in this level of understanding of how buildings work. And actually, if we're going to be bringing up the level of kind of retrofit impact, it's going to have to be the lowest common denominator, not just, you know, the echelons of what we can achieve up here. We've got to be able to also help those who haven't got access to this. So yeah.
So David, Charlotte's already posted the question and we've got some interesting responses. So I'd encourage everybody to have a look at question 3 that Charlotte posted on the chat at 6:02. It says, what might you be able to do to create a more sustainable and just society using the retrofit or other skills you have? So perhaps, David, if you want to just look at them one by one, and I suspect we'll get more questions coming up as you look at those. Thank you.
Sure, no worries. And Chris, do have a look as well. It'd be really great if you can feedback on any thoughts you've got. Where are we going back to here?
If you'd like, I can read them out, David, then you're not having to try.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thanks, Lucy.
Yeah, sure. So Anna responded first saying, regarding what might you be able to do, intervene at design stage, advise clients and designers how to maximise savings. So that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because that has an impact across all sorts of things, but getting those thoughts in first and discussions. Do you have any sort of thoughts about that?
Yes, I mean, I agree. The earlier it can happen in the design stage, the better. I think particularly for us, we want to try and adopt it as a methodology so that we're beginning to incorporate it right from the start of a project, rather than looking to do what's sort of possible later on once things are established and we've got it through planning or whatever. And that can, you know, I know that may be, that may sound really, I don't know, it may be that you find that approach is very unusual, you know, in terms of introducing these things later on, but there's so many projects out there where this does not get introduced as a line of thinking until much later on when it's quite limited, and the options are much more limited. Or you end up with project teams who have a kind of rudimentary project management type understanding of the issues around this. And so effectively, you're just targeting a standard. We were just going for something and everything then gets engineered around achieving whatever it is, BREEAM or the old Code for Sustainable Homes or whatever it was that was the guiding factor. And I think we can have a much more intelligent approach based on what's available in terms of information, and not everything. Yeah, personally, I don't think everything is 100% brilliant, if that makes sense. So just because you've come out with something, there's likely to be some weaknesses with it. We should be trying to pick the strengths out of the different aspects of what we're presented and what we can see and understand. The most important thing is that we do something, you know, that we actually engage and start to implement it. We hope that we're on some kind of upward curve with improving the way we tackle this area on our retrofits.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the later you bring in these measures, the more expensive they get because design decisions have been made. So, you know, if you've got a limited budget, which most people have, and certainly Habitat for Humanity would have, the earlier you bring it in, the most cost effective it is. Chris, I mean, just unmute yourself. I'm not going to put you on the spot here, but if you've got something to say, please just unmute yourself. Aaron says crowdfunding to support community projects.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think David's alluded to it earlier. The finance element of this is extremely important, and I've got an example of crowdfunding that's worked. Community charity that ran nurseries in a city in the southwest. They last year, one of their nurseries became so run down that it wasn't safe to use, and so they used crowdfunding to produce this, to get enough funds to build this new nursery, which was insulated, and it's opened only a few weeks ago. So I think it can and should be done. That's a great suggestion.
Yeah, and I think also with the community-led sector, which we're quite in touch with, there are lots of opportunities now for coming together with different funding structures. I mean, there's community shares, for instance, which means that you can, you know, there's a local project, there's a local referendum effectively on that project, so that you can access funding through raising it between you and having a kind of governance structure that enables that funding to be held for the purpose of that project. It also, the community land trust type structure enables the asset also to be held for the benefit of the community in perpetuity, and kept at an affordable rent or affordable rate, or affordable sale, whatever it is, for the future. So there are different structures that are happening through, you know, part of this is part of the localism move that the government made. As others come on board and perhaps help steer it towards a less political agenda, it becomes more and more meaningful for community and for society, because everybody is beginning to have an input. And I think the most important thing is engagement, because I think sometimes the way we do things in this country can be disempowering. Politically, we end up looking to the government to solve problems rather than coming together as a community or as organisations, hence what we're trying to do with the coalition. You know, we have a huge amount of skills between us, and actually collaborating together will achieve a lot more.
Great, thank you both. We've got some great questions here. Thank you all for posting them here. Vicky is responding to question 3. Consider the urban planning issues of the property location, especially adjacent to high streets.
Yeah, Vicky, do you want to just expand on that so that I can fully understand where you're coming from?
Yeah, sure. I've done some work in Hounslow where they had quite a lot of antisocial problems adjacent to the high street with those kind of entrances that you were talking about off side alleyways. So I guess it's making sure that thinking all those kind of secure by design principles, and yeah, like you were doing on the example that you gave with that entrance.
Yeah.
And it's just making sure that, yeah, everything you're doing, not just the retrofit, but that kind of wider context is enhancing the high street or the relative location.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly the issue that we had with that property, because I can remember when we first went to see it, they were talking about trying to get an entrance around the back for the young people, and there was a sort of alleyway to the side, and we were just like, that's really not going to work for the beneficiary. It's inappropriate, it's not secure. We were fortunate that was an end of terrace and we were able to do something out the side, but yeah, it can be a problem where they're landlocked effectively, or building locked, as it were. But I think you've got to just look at each one in context. I think with some creative thinking, you can overcome these things. Also, if the retail's not performing very well, there might be a shop below, but it may be on quite a short lease. It might be that if it's owned by the council, whatever, then there could be a period without a tenant where you can introduce access from the front and a corridor, and effectively the shop gets back into use again. So it's not insurmountable, but you do have to be creative with the approaches, definitely.
Thanks, David. And Hank brings a really interesting question, which I think for a lot of people you know, when you're trying to persuade a client to spend money on sustainable measures, he says the difficulty for us is often to be able to explain what is best bang for the buck. We're trying to get a better understanding of costs of improvements on retrofit, as is so often about capital outlay.
Yeah. Yeah, I can only agree.
Yeah.
We're exactly the same position, Hank. We're trying to, and we've thought, right, what we need to do is, you know, with others who know more than us, try and put together some costs around aiming for sort of building regs level. I guess we need to consider the uplift in that, and then one around the LETI best practice, and then one around Enefit, just so that we can understand what the cost implications of that are on an actual project that we've got. So we've got a project in Dagenham, which is one of the ones that Barking and Dagenham have released to us, and that's at the perfect stage to consider this, because we're at early design stage. So we're really keen to understand exactly that. Where are we going to pitch it? What's the cost implications of it? At the end of the day, we're effectively working on other people's property. So it's not something that we can just decide for ourselves anyway. The local authority will have to be on board with that decision. But I think if we can present a persuasive argument, and I think we shouldn't always just be looking at the capital outlay either. I think we should be considering the running costs for the building, the future home, in terms of how it's going to perform, and then the impact, the environmental impact. If we don't go further, you know, might there be more costs later because you have to adapt that building to meet future standards. So I think all of these come into play, and at the moment it feels quite complex in terms of trying to understand where we settle. But as I said, I mean, it's great. The poll was really helpful because it kind of confirmed my thinking that we should be really exploring that best practice retrofit LETI from the LETI guide. Yeah. Thank you.
Next question, it's interesting, I've just read it from Laura. The words government and joined up thinking in the same sentence doesn't quite work for me. She asks, states lobby the government to have joined up thinking about retrofitting older properties that should have a fabric first approach rather than an EPC driven renewables which tick the right box for votes. Throwing money at renewing boilers with air source heat pumps is not the solution. And if I might just sort of comment on that actually before you two respond, I think that's what we try to explore at the Green Register, is we're really trying to give people information about effective measures, not just ones that tick boxes, but ones that are the flavour of the month or the year. You know, they're things that will actually make a significant difference. So Chris, David, any comments on that, on Laura's?
Yeah, I think that was one of the most ambitious of the suggestions, the joined up thinking, but it is critical. I mean, you guys probably know better than me how frustrating it can be when you get so far along down the line and then a new policy, a new legislation, a new sort of government idea comes out that sets it back. And I think the information that they have in this particular area is not sufficient enough yet. So yeah, if you can lobby them and get them to think in a joined up way, and just repeatedly act in a single direction in this area, then that would be hugely beneficial.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that is what I mentioned before, that if we know why we're doing something, if we're really confident about why we're doing it, we've really explored and researched and understood that actually for us in this context, in this situation, it's right, because we're thinking on a number of different levels about why, then we should be able to have confidence to say that and to push back on certain things. At the end of the day, there's a bit too much tokenism going on. We're all aware of that, and box ticking. But sometimes underneath all of these things, there is a genuine drive. And I think once you get beyond that initial kind of interaction into a sort of deeper level conversation, you find that there is a will there to want to see something come about. And then actually when you're dealing with officers, say within local authorities or government policymakers or whatever it is, they are still people at the end of the day. I think it's really important to remember that, and they have hearts and minds. And so you can engage people and you can, within the parameters, try and find a creative solution that overcomes the limitations, but we all get so frustrated at the limitations, but we can forever moan about the problem. We've got to kind of get on with the solution.
Absolutely. Now we have some absolutely great questions here, guys, and we've almost run out of time. So I'm just going to jump to the one which I think is a good one to end on. But and I want to give Tessa enough time to be able to talk about the Gingerbread house challenge. But if either of you want to scroll through any of the questions we haven't addressed and put some comments in the chat, that would be great. So just to finish up, Brandon's question is, or comment, many homes in my area, long-term unoccupied, 20 to 30 years, incentives to bring them back into use and planned and systematic investigations why they are not punishment, often long-term vacant for silly reasons.
Yeah. Well, we've come across a lot of that. I mean, our work with empty homes and empty homes offices has meant that we're often walking into buildings that have been empty well over 10 years, if not more. And I think not wanting to do down a system that's been established by the government to try and bring these back, it's got its limitations. It's been going for years, the empty homes schemes initiatives, and I think the problem is that they often provide a framework and get something going. It's the curse that we sometimes have as well with funding streams. You know, they get established over a 3-year period. So what often happens is you're well into the first year of the fund before they finally got around to releasing the first bit of money, and then they're closing it down possibly a year towards the end. You've got like a window of a year to get your project in and up and running, and then effectively, you know, the whole program's being shut down. So the capacity building that's happened gets really cut short, and then it's reinvented in another form. So I think these cycles of government funding don't help. A longer trajectory on funding would be really helpful. When I came on the scene with Habitat in 2011, you know, empty homes offices were reeling from having the rug having been pulled out from under their feet. They had some really well-established programs. Often they were quite creative around it, and they were bringing properties back. And then the funding got pulled, and a lot of them were sitting with an axe over their heads in terms of their jobs, and were having to kind of justify their existence on a sort of 6-month contract basis. And when you're like that, it's very short-term thinking. You can't get away from it. So I think part of the problem is the way we do programs and funding. But we're unlikely to change that tonight. But it's great to realise that and still kind of look to try and lobby and look to try and change. I've gone back to people that have given us funding when it's been a sensible programme and said, this was brilliant, it really worked, can you do it again? But you don't often find the same programmes being run again. Yeah.
Good, thank you. Chris, anything to add to that?
No, that was a very comprehensive answer. I was just looking at some of the comments and questions, and
Thank you. Yeah.
really great questions and comments on question 3. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you both very much. So as you know, we're going to end with a prize draw for a gingerbread because it is Christmas time. And to finish up, we've got Tessa Kelly who's going to tell us about the Habitat for Humanity Gingerbread House Challenge. So Tessa, do you have slides or are you just going to talk?
Yeah, I'm going to bring it up.
I think David has my slides. So.
Yeah.
Thanks.
While you're loading up, is it a bit of a change of tack? So just to add context to this, obviously Habitat for Humanity are a global brand, and usually my job is to bring in the grant funding from corporates that David's talked about that helps to subsidise these empty spaces to homes projects and our international work. And one of the things that we really thought about over the course of the last few years is, as we build up the relationship with the private sector and our general public supporters, we needed to have a call to action, something people could do easily, quickly, affordably, beyond, you know, raising funds for running marathons or raising thousands of pounds to go on overseas trips to do volunteering for us. So we launched in 2019 the Gingerbread House Challenge, and really it's a celebration of what we do around the world. Okay, so the project we've just described is a bit more complex than building houses, but Habitat was built on a basis of building homes globally. And now we also advocate for land rights, support communities who are facing eviction from informal settlements, upgrade buildings in slums, work on finance and microfinance for housing and credit. So a huge range of things, but we wanted to celebrate what we're all about, which is houses. And a couple of years ago, the gingerbread house concept was all the rage, so we thought we would jump on that bandwagon and encourage our partners to get involved too. So David, if you want to skip to the next slide.
Yeah. The next one.
So, yeah, I think this probably tells it just what I just about to said, but basically, so we really thought the best time and place to do this, an opportunity for people to have a bit of fun, a bit of a laugh, is Christmas. And we know that for our partners, a way for their teams to engage with our work, to hear more about our work, is to have events and activities and something to do. So we formed the Gingerbread House Challenge, which is usually, and was supposed to be this year, a office-based Christmas party activity. We have just made most of the activities that we're doing virtual for reasons I won't need to go into. Next slide, David. So the concept is pretty simple. Either people buy a gingerbread house kit, and any of the big supermarkets now have them, so you can buy them in Aldi and Lidl, you can buy them in Asda, Tesco and Sainsbury's. They have slightly posher ones in Waitrose, very much posher ones in Selfridges. Or we have a downloadable pack where you can cut gingerbread, make your own gingerbread with a recipe and to a template, and bake and build your own gingerbread house. We encourage people to donate £5 to participate in the challenge, and then auction off their house or use it for their Christmas centerpiece of their Christmas lunch. And then to enter our gingerbread house competition by sharing a picture of their completed house on social media. We have 4 prize categories. So we have best house, most innovative design, most engaged and Habitat messages, and then an epic fail, sort of got a wooden spoon type prize. And there are prizes available for all of those if people submit their entry by donating the £5 and uploading their photograph. We really encourage people to do this either as workplaces or as families over the course of the next 2 or 3 weeks, submitting a picture by the 23rd of December with a hamper or prize being sent in the new year. If you go to the next slide, David. Oh, this is just an example of the types of projects that can be supported through the funds raised through the Gingerbread House Challenge. So here are some of the example projects that we've worked on internationally and in the UK. So as well as the project that David's mentioned about empty spaces to homes, we've also been doing a really exciting project in Zambia around women's land rights. Some shocking statistics about women's land rights. A lot of women are facing in sub-Saharan Africa a concept called widow inheritance, which basically means that when their husband dies, they are expected to marry a male member of their husband's family in order to maintain the rights to their home that they have. So we've created these amazing study circles to help women, especially in rural areas, better understand their rights. We are working on the Empty Spaces to Homes project. We are working on vital water and sanitation projects. We don't think a decent house does not include access to a toilet and clean water. So we do a lot of water and sanitation projects. So this is just examples of where the funds go. Next slide. And just to let you know that on our website, we have a link to a downloadable pack, which, as I said, has recipes, has ideas, has inspiration around what you can do with the Gingerbread House Challenge. And yeah, next slide. And these are some pictures. As you can see, people, it is really fun. And one of the things we've heard, we managed to host it in 2019. We went purely virtual in 2020, and we posted a couple early December, and now going back to virtual. But the things that we hear from people is they can't do it with their phone, and they can't do it in front of their computer. So they really do stop and sit down and have a conversation and switch off from work, which is fantastic. It's great from a teamwork perspective. People rotate, have ideas, have a chance to get to know each other better. And it's really, really great for kids, especially kids, you know, going from primary to secondary. It's a really good opportunity for them to test out their sort of developing motor skills, think about physics, think about science, think about how things stick together. So for the budding architects out there, they can actually get an idea of why a roof will slip off if you put lots of wet icing and then all the weight of a piece of gingerbread on top. So this is just a sort of a visual of how much fun it can be, and just to ask if they've got any questions, but and really to encourage you to go online and download the pack and join the competition. I think that's me. Is it David? Do I have another slide? No.
Yay, great. Thank you very much, Tessa. That's absolutely wonderful. What a great thing.
I like the Christmas hat.
I love the hat.
I mean, if anyone wants me to judge the architect's gingerbread house competition, I am definitely up for that.
Okay, Chris, that is such a good idea.
We could do a whole London skyline, get the Shard in gingerbread.
So I'd like to thank our three speakers, David, Chris and Tessa. That's absolutely wonderful. I hope you'll participate in the Gingerbread House Challenge. I also hope that you'll join us next year for some of our events. Charlotte's already put the link to our website. We've got the next Toolbox talk, which is on modern methods of construction. And David had mentioned about the case studies that we've been doing. We've got another one coming up on the 13th of January. So do join us for that. Yeah, so thanks all very much for a really interesting talk. We're so much behind what Habitat for Humanity are doing. It's just so important. I was absolutely shocked to hear from Chris that over 250,000 people are homeless here. So have a very, very good festive time. Let's hope 2022 is better for everybody. Thank you. And if David, Chris and Tessa could just stay on the line for a bit longer. Bye-bye.